Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Schatz and Tanier NFL Podcast Special Tuesday episode from FTN Fantasy. I am Aaron Schatz. He is Mike Tanier from themessenger.com. It is January 16th, 2024, and we are here one day late to talk about the wild card round of the NFL playoffs. Since they were nice enough to play 2 games on Monday instead of 1 game on Monday, we decided we'd just wrap the whole thing up at once on Tuesday, and here we are. So before we talk about the 4 divisional round games, and it's funny, I don't remember who I was talking to about the fact that we've decided we're calling it the divisional round. Like every sport now, I mean, baseball calls it the divisional round. What a weird name.
It is.
Right? The NBA calls it the conference semifinals, which makes more sense.
Indeed. Right. Like it's not really divisional in any way. When there's been 3 wild cards and there's wild cards to start in, there's nothing divisional.
Right. It was the divisional round back in the day when there were only 2 wild cards and they played in the wild card game, and then the divisional teams showed up.
Yes.
Anyway, let's talk about the teams that are out from the last 6 games. And let's start with your Philadelphia Eagles and what comes next after this colossal collapse. You know, I mean, I tried to take a little bit of a victory lap about the fact that DVOA knew all along that the Eagles were not as good as their record, but DVOA at no point thought this was going to happen.
Right. DVOA was here and the Eagles kind of went, and
fell below that floor. Like, yeah. I mean, I thought the Eagles would lose a couple games. I thought that they would win those final games of the season against the bad teams, go into the playoffs, and then someone would shock them in the playoff. And we'd be like, oh, I guess the Eagles were never as good as their record. I did not think that team would implode. And I am not somebody who generally believes in players in the National Football League giving up. Like these guys come to play hard,
right?
Even when teams are out of it, they know that they've got to put stuff on film for the next job, man.
Right.
And so the team players do not quit, and yet it almost feels like that's kind of what happened in Philadelphia.
Players don't necessarily quit, but they can tune out their coaches. They can sort of quit during the week, or not so much quit, but morale is real. Morale is real everywhere. You know, morale is real in foxholes. Morale is real in that locker room. And this isn't something that can be explained by looking at the stat sheet or looking at the personnel. This is a team that I think was sort of not particularly excited to be there. And there's another. And while some guys, not a lot of guys quit, some guys do press as well. So, like, they're out there on the field, and maybe I'm trying my hardest. Then you start overrunning tackles. Then you start missing assignments. Then you start making mistakes like that. And sometimes that's compounded by the fact that on Tuesday or Wednesday, when you walked into work in the meeting, you were still grumbling about what happened the day before. You're not happy with your coach. You're feuding with one of your teammates. And all of that snowballs into what we've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Don't forget that if you are watching us live on YouTube, we'll take your comments and questions. And Todd Singer says, did you see a fan holding up the Fire Sirianni sign?
Right.
Who would they hire to replace him? Right? Like, I mean, I think Sirianni had been a pretty good coach for a year and a half.
Okay.
And I don't understand what's happened over the last couple months. I don't understand the decision to change the defensive coordinator from Seth Desai to Matt Patricia in the first place. What was that decision made for?
I was on a Jody Max podcast, an Eagles-based podcast, and it didn't feel like a sports podcast. It felt like a war tribunal. Like, that's the level we're at. And one of the questions they were asking is, who made the Desai decision? Was it Nick Sirianni? Was it Howie Roseman? Was it Jeffrey Lurie? Was it some combination of them? And no one knows the answer to that. But it looks like it was a panicky reaction that accelerated this problem, that this team was having some issues, and then you put Patricia in there, and whether Patricia is calling plays badly, which I think he was, or guys were like, oh, that's how it's going to be around here. I've got to listen to this guy now, and started to tune out, etc. I think there was some combination of both of them. But in terms of Fire Sirianni, here are the all-time active head coaches' winning percentages of coaches with more than 50 games. Number 1, Matt LaFleur, 675. Number 2, Nick Sirianni, 667. He's won 2/3 of his games. Number 3, Belichick. Number 4, Andy Reid. Number 5, Sean McDermott. We all know, obviously, larger sample size means more opportunities have a lower winning percentage.
Right.
3 winning seasons, 3 playoff appearances, and you're going to take 2 years and a third year up to Thanksgiving, and you're going to cut it loose for what happened from Thanksgiving on. I'm not saying it's not possible. I just think it would be further panicking for a team that's spent the last 6 weeks.
I do like the people who have linked the Eagles to Belichick.
Of course.
Yes, because what they want after the last few weeks of Matt Patricia is to bring in the guy who handed Matt Patricia his offense.
Right. Patricia will be director of player personnel and offensive coordinator under Belichick. Yeah, but of course, that's what we do here. Belichick's going to coach 6 teams next year. So
I also think like this has given people who don't like Jalen Hurts a chance to dance on his grave. I saw somebody who posted about, Jalen Hurts has always been a very limited quarterback, and now the Eagles are finally finding it out, and how are they going to solve their problems on the roster when they have this quarterback who costs so much money who isn't any good?
Right. That's the great thing about Justin Herbert. He doesn't get to the playoffs to break your heart. That's what makes him so special.
Jason Kelce is retiring.
Yep.
And Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham are probably done.
Graham is signaling that he wants to come back. Fletcher Cox is not. I think Brandon Graham has a lot of local endorsements and things too. Graham isn't somebody who wants to go to another city for a year or two. Fletcher will take the money and run for another year or two along the way. Most of the free agents are older guys. And that's, again, we were talking on the podcast, these are the old clubhouse leaders. But if this leadership was so valuable, where has it been in the last 6 weeks? When they lost to the Cowboys and the 49ers, that's where I think Fletcher Cox and Kelce and Lane Johnson, Brendan Graham say, hey guys, we've been through it all with this team. Trust us. We were through Chip Kelly and we lost a Super Bowl and we won a Super Bowl. Trust us. That message never got to the rest of the locker room.
The funny thing is, I don't know what they're going to do in the offseason, but they have cap room. They can pick up. I can't imagine we're going to go into next year without the Eagles being one of the top contenders.
Right. I mean, if they trade A.J. Brown because A.J. Brown wants to set the world on fire, they're going to get value for him. You still come in with Devontae Smith. You still have defensive linemen who are young, not the guys we talked about, who are really solid defensive linemen. If you fix the secondary of this team, it's probably in pretty good shape. They drafted heir apparents to Kelce. They've got Jurgens, who's been playing guard. They had Steed, the guy they drafted. There's succession plans in place there, so these Eagles should be good. But there's a lot of questions. Darius Slay, what are you doing? What are you doing with that situation? What are you doing with A.J. Brown? Can you mollify him? Is that worth it? So, yeah, I mean, I don't see how they're not number 2 in the NFC East at the very least, and then what does that make them?
Mike Roosh wants to know, apropos of nothing, will there be a version of the old FO awards this year? The NFL script campaign demands my worst ad vote. I am sorry to say, but among the things that will have to go by the wayside with our move to FTN is the old FO awards. I do not have a method to do balloting of any kind.
Right.
To do an awards ballot. So
I didn't see Josh Allen and Peppa Pig. Did you see it?
No, I didn't see that one.
No, all I heard about was Josh Allen and Peppa Pig. It's hard when you're covering the games because when the commercials comes, you're usually jotting your notes down and all. So I don't know. That probably would have been a best one.
Super Glucose says, my only question is, how about them Cowboys? Now I'm gonna say I'm not a big fan of the Cowboys discourse because I realize there are still some Cowboy fans who are bandwagon jumpers who like them because they're super popular, but it's been so long since they've won that I think they're not really quite in that category. I think a lot of Dallas fans now are just longtime Dallas fans. They're real fans. And I don't like seeing them have to suffer so long. And for you, it's a little bit different because you're an Eagles fan and they're the bad guys. And
right. It's generational. There are deep wounds and scars here in this area.
So what do we do with this? I am generally a believer, and I have said many times that you fail in the playoffs until the year you succeed.
Right.
That history is filled with players in every sport who couldn't get it done in the playoffs until the year they did.
Right.
But wow,
Yeah.
It's getting to be a lot with Dak Prescott.
A lot, and like that was a pratfall. That was a first half pratfall against a really bad and exploitable defense.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that the Cowboys defense played worse.
Yes.
But Dak Prescott's performance was more inexcusable given the quality of the Packers offense and defense.
Exactly.
Right? Like, oh, Jordan Love lit up the Cowboys. I could imagine. Dak Prescott could not do anything against this Packers defense. Was not what I thought
was a net negative against this defense, was turning the ball over and making mistakes on third down.
I asked you yesterday for, thinking about quarterbacks who have a similar record, where they were phenomenal in the regular season, MVP candidate level multiple times in the regular season, and then in the playoffs just completely fell on their faces.
Right.
Now, the name that I thought was Drew Bledsoe.
Yeah.
Except Drew Bledsoe had the year where he went to the Super Bowl.
Right.
He was not that good that year.
Right.
He was not that good in that year, but they went to the Super Bowl with him. If you flip Bledsoe's career around, he looks like the guy who could never do it in the playoffs until he finally makes a Super Bowl.
Right. But it's different. Like
he made it, so that's different than Prescott. You came up with a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Randall Cunningham,
although that's just a weird case. Randall's always an outlier in these things. And like the way he was coached, the way a dual threat quarterback of his nature was treated back then was different. But I believe they were 1-4 in playoff games when he was there.
At the Eagles, and then 2-2, I believe, with the Vikings.
And of course, there was the Fog Bowl. There was a game against the Rams where they created the Eagle defense, which was like a 2-5. And prevent him from scrambling. There are all these things that indicated, hey, Randall Cunningham's stuff isn't going to work against us in the playoffs.
You mentioned Dave Craig.
Yeah.
But Dave Craig was never as good as Dak Prescott has been in the regular season.
No, Craig was always, it's a weird, like his record was bad, but he was always like with this team that was 9-7 coming into the playoffs. Right. And I was like, oh, this quarterback is 9th round pick or whatever he was, and they would lose and be like, oh, well, that's who they are.
So it's just really hard to think of a player similar to this who was this good, who failed in the playoffs before we even get to the Super Bowl multiple times. Because Hitchhiker's Pie brings up John Elway, but John Elway kept making it to the Super Bowl. He just kept failing in the Super Bowl. Prescott's not even making it to conference championship games.
And that's it. Like you can he never won the big game, and you got this guy, well, he was in the Super Bowl once, he was in a conference championship game, you can scratch it off. When you're consistently bowing out of the playoffs under these circumstances, it's harder to just laugh off and say, that's rhetoric, that's a narrative. And you have to look at it and say, whether it's the player, the team, et cetera, something is short-circuiting that is causing this to happen.
I mean, I so much want Prescott to get over this hump. For Prescott and for the sake of the he can't do it in the playoff narrative about every player.
Yeah, ever in history, right.
But so far, so bad. Warren Moon, Hitchhiker's Pie brings up.
Yes.
I don't know Warren Moon's playoff record, but he never made a Super Bowl. That's true.
He never made the Super Bowl. Of course, he's involved in these legendary comeback games against him.
That is a player who was super great in the regular season, like Prescott.
And that was often blamed on the run and shoot offense, where you say, well, now you're facing these tougher defenses in the playoffs. 3-7 in the postseason.
Yeah,
3-7 in the postseason.
I think that's your comparison. Warren Moon is your Dak Prescott comparison.
Right. And then one thing is, most of the wins that Moon had were earlier in his career, so that mollifies it a little bit. Where you win a couple playoff games early, you're less likely to carry that. But that is
Warren Moon never made it to a Super Bowl.
Right.
$16 million over the cap. Veterans moving on. What happens to the Cowboys next year?
Dak's number is $59.4 million.
So they're going to end up extending him.
They're going to have to extend him, and I just wonder if Jerry probably should have done it. He should have already taken care of it. So it's going to be. I've been telling everybody it's going to be one of those weird Jerry things where it goes too long, and he talks about it, and it becomes toxic, and it gets weird. And we'll be at the scouting combine, and we'll see Jerry screaming at somebody across the steakhouse at about 2 a.m, and then there'll be a contract extension. But I mean, we can talk about Prescott's playoff record, et cetera. You're not going to find a better quarterback, Dallas Cowboys. You're not. So you might as well find an extension.
It's not even like the argument we're going to have about Tua.
No.
Dak Prescott is a win because of quarterback. Yeah. He's not the best of the win because of quarterbacks.
He's right at that.
But he's not a Kirk Cousins. He is a win because of quarterback with a bad playoff record.
And you have to find a way to get his compensation logical so you can keep CD, who is on this 5th-year option, so you can extend Parsons so you don't turn Parsons into this thing that waits too long. And they don't have a lot. Actually, they do have a lot else because, my God, the free agent list, Tyron Smith's on it, Tony Pollard's on it, and they don't have anything behind him at running back. Fowler's on it. You don't think of Fowler as that big a deal, but he's had a lot of sacks the last couple of years. They've got some guys they have to take care of, and so they're going to need that money.
By the way, speaking of quarterbacks who failed in the playoffs, I didn't know if I should bring this up now or when we get to previewing the divisional round. For those who didn't see, for FTN subscribers, you can now download player playoff stats.
Oh.
DYAR and DVOA. Do you know who is the worst quarterback in the history of the playoffs by DYAR? Passing. In fact, both passing and rushing together, in fact.
Lamar Jackson?
Lamar Jackson.
Oh, no.
So if you want a narrative, imagine Baltimore gets upset by Houston.
See, now you're going to actually have me watching that game like anxious and upset.
I don't think it will continue. But I think that ends after this week. But yeah. Should Miami give Tua Tagovailoa a big extension, and will they?
No, and probably.
Yeah, I think so. I think the answer is no and probably.
One reason that there's going to be more impetus, because I look at this and say, hey, play on the 5th-year contract, on the 5th-year option, and then, hey, you can put him an offer and you can franchise him for a year. This is dirty pool in terms of being like a good person, but if you're running a team, you do this. And you kind of wait to see who this guy really, 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 really is, because he has not shown he's in that upper tier. The 5th-year option is pretty expensive for him, and the Dolphins are in bad cap shape. So if they do an extension now, they can spread that money out and solve some other problems along the way.
Yeah, it just means they're tied to Tagovailoa, and Tagovailoa is, this is where we are in the NFL right now. We're feeling like there's this group of quarterbacks that doesn't feel like they're necessarily win because of guys. And we can argue about Purdy, but the fact is Purdy, Tagovailoa, Goff, they have great numbers.
You don't have to worry about Purdy's dollars for 2 more years. So you can just pick him away as you keep. I think of Tua as a win-with. He's a win-with quarterback. He has enough attributes that's the case. For Goff, because he's a veteran on different contracts, you can play ball with his compensation. Tua's in there saying, I get my Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow money. I get it now. It's going to be hard to lowball him, and that's what makes that such a difficult situation. I'm guessing you can structure something for Goff that's a 2-year extension at whatever, $43 million a year, and it sounds a little high, but there's an out at the end. It's almost impossible to do that with Tua right now because he's part of this group.
Yeah. Who's the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year?
Justin Fields. Well, it might be Kenny Pickett because I think that the team is delusional. And one thing I think they could do, the Steelers in the past have traded up in the first round. The Steelers are not big wheeler dealers, but they've traded up to get guys. I mean, I think they traded up to get Polamalu years ago. They could. This is a team that say, hey, here's our 2025 number 1 pick. Here's our
not into the top 3. But to get Michael Penix.
Yeah, and that wouldn't be a terrible thing. I was watching Jaden Daniels this morning, by the way, and I was just like, oh.
Is that a good, as a Patriots fan, should I be happy about your explosion?
You should be happy.
Given that he is probably the quarterback of the New England Patriots next year.
I was crushing.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Steelers can't get him, but maybe they can get in position to get somebody.
And then the other question about the teams that lost this weekend is, what on earth will the Browns do with Deshaun Watson? At this point, I think you have to expect Deshaun Watson to be bad.
Of course.
When it was 5 or 6 games compared to the rest of his career, that was one thing.
Yeah.
Now it's a year and a half compared to the rest of his career. I think you have to expect him to be bad next year.
You have to expect him to be Yes, bad, mediocre, however you want to put this. Somebody who's, below Tua, for example, on the list of quarterbacks that you would look at. And they almost have to restructure his contract. They almost have to push more money into the next year because their cap situation is messed up. And the only thing I can say to that team is you can win. If you can win with Joe Flacco and get to playoffs, you can win with Deshaun Watson being kind of that's your option right now.
Except
yes,
that defense is less predictive than offense.
Exactly.
And the odds that their defense is this good again next year are small.
Right. So you're hoping that you can keep that defense somewhere in the line. You can get another receiver besides Cooper, make that better. And then you're like, oh, maybe the Steelers roll with Kenny Pickett and they fall apart, etc. And that's your option. You can't rebuild now. You cannot do anything except go into win now mode based on that contract.
Before we talk about the divisional round, RP8 says, Aaron, how are you feeling now about your Bills 49ers Super Bowl pick? I feel very good because I think that I'm going to be proven right in one way or the other. I mean no disrespect to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
I think it would be hard for the Kansas City Chiefs to get past both the Bills and the Ravens, both on the road.
Right.
I think it's very likely that the Super Bowl is either DVOA proves correct about the Ravens from the early part of the season when DVOA liked the Ravens better than everyone else, and the Ravens play the 49ers, or my preseason prediction is proven right and the Bills play the 49ers. I do think the 49ers have an easier road to the Super Bowl than the Bills or the Ravens, than any of the AFC teams.
Right. Right. And the Bills are unstoppable. Just ignore the second and third quarters.
Texans at Ravens -9. That is the first game of the divisional round. I've got a stat or two on each of these games. Lamar Jackson was second in the league in DVOA on passes to the left side of the field. The Texans were dead last on defense on passes to the left side of the field. That's Steven Nelson's side.
Steven Nelson's side, where he's a stopgap veteran who's kind of done okay by the standards. But yeah, that's exploitable.
Yeah. So what are you thinking generally about the Texans at the Ravens?
My stat that I ran in the messenger, the Texans were second in the NFL with 130 missed tackles. Only the Washington Commanders missed more tackles than the Houston Texans. So you have a defense that was playing really well on Saturday and is like playing above its station, but -9, I could talk myself into Texans +9 because again, historically, Ravens and big spreads, you get nervous about that. Ravens should roll.
Yeah, I can definitely see Lamar Jackson winding through the Texans defense with all those missed tackles.
Nobody able to even keep up with him. Yes.
Packers at 49ers -10. And my stat that I looked here is first downs. The 49ers, who are number one on offense in almost every way, are, of course, number one on offense on first downs. The Packers are number 31 number 31 on defense on first downs. Like, as good as Love is playing, the other side of this game is such a mismatch. Unless the 49ers come out and run the exact same offensive scheme that the Cowboys did.
Which they won't.
Like, it is really hard to see the Packers, as good as Love is.
Yes.
He would have to have another game like he did this week.
Right.
And they might still lose.
Right. And that I don't see it happening. And Alexander is hurt for the Packers, and that the signaling out of there is that's bad. They lost Kingsley. Ngabare. He looks bad. Not a super massive contributor, but that's like 25 snaps in the rotation of the edge rushers there. They're not going to be able to stop anything. The Packers will not be able to stop anything. And if I decide to take the points and the Packers, it's because I have this feeling that Love's going to go ham. And I'm very much debatable on that.
Let's move to Sunday. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Detroit Lions -6.
That's a lot of points.
Here's a couple of stats. The Lions DVOA is better without a blitz. And we know Tampa loves to blitz.
Yes.
But also, the Lions offense is better against zone.
Okay.
And Tampa Bay's defense is first in man, but 29th in zone.
Man up on those receivers.
Man up and blitz.
Man up and blitz. There's only one guy you got to really worry about. It's Amon-Ra.
Double Amon-Ra.
Yeah. And I know the Lions won the first game. They won it pretty handily. This isn't the best matchup for the Lions. They don't match up well with those wide receivers. They don't match up well with this defense that blitzes a lot. So I will not lay 6 with the Detroit Lions. I'll tell you what. I'm leaning towards the Buccaneers in that game, more because of the matchup than because I really believe in the Buccaneers in some way.
I think that I would lean to the Bucks +6 too.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right.
Not that I would favor them. I wouldn't favor them.
No.
But I would have the line more like 4 because of the way the Lions defense. Yeah, Iceman points out the Lions defense was playing way better in week 6 than they are now.
Yes. Like lots of little holes have been found in that defense that weren't there, and I think a couple of guys have been hurt.
The final game of the weekend is the one we're all waiting for. This is the one that everyone loves. Yeah, I've got my little guy.
Yeah, we got to get our Fisher Price.
This is my little Mahomes. This is my little Josh Allen. We're playing each other
with the mustache. There you go.
Chiefs at Bills -2.5.
Well, I mean, this is the game of the century. I don't know if I have collected thoughts right now that anyone else doesn't.
I mean, these two teams have played a lot.
Yes. There's history.
In the playoffs, the Chiefs have won.
Right.
In the regular season, the Bills have won.
Right.
The game is always at Arrowhead.
Yes.
Until now.
And now it's in Buffalo. By the way, earlier reports, temperature around 22 degrees. Who cares? Both teams played in a blizzard
last week, so they're fine.
Right.
I'm more worried about the Bills' injuries. Terrell Bernard looks like he's done.
Yes.
Terron Johnson was a head injury, so he may be back. I don't know what's going on with Rasul Douglas, but he missed this last game.
Right. It sounded like it was game time, so he might be back.
Injuries are a problem right now.
Yes.
For the Bills' defense. Bills, I mean, the biggest stat here is the Bills' improved running game against the Chiefs' defense ranked 27th against the run.
Right. And I think that's one of the things we're going to have to exploit. Although, I look at the Bills' running game, especially when it's not Josh Allen just rumbling through guys, and it's kind of a fits and starts running game. There's a lot of times where they're running often, but not super high efficiency. And I'll be curious to see what that looks like on the field this week.
Hitchhiker's Pie points out that Gabe Davis should at least be back for the offense. And I will point out the Chiefs are 25th against number 2 wide receivers.
And Gabe Davis torched them a couple of years ago in the gone in 13 seconds game.
T.A. Foster asks, what is the biggest impact injury for next week overall? I'm assuming he's saying of the injuries that took place in the wild card round. Because otherwise I would say the biggest impact injury is, does Rasul Douglas play or not?
Right. That and maybe, not Alexander so much because I think that game's a wash either way.
I feel like you just throw away from Alexander and then have a party.
And then you're still winning. It would be Douglas or it would be Bernard.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
So, something.
I think I would take Chiefs +2.5.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I love the Bills because of the injuries.
Right. Let's check back in 48 hours on the space and see if we get more injury updates. Because the Johnson injury is a head injury. If this is concussion protocol, that can get very iffy. A lot of times that means a guy missing a week. And we're talking about in the secondary replacements for the replacements at some level, especially Rasul Douglas.
Michael Allen Brewer says, is the increase in injuries directly proportional to the added 17th game, or are we seeing an injury multiplier since it was added? I have no idea the answer to that question. It honestly seems to me like there aren't any more injuries than there normally would be in a playoff week.
I agree.
I think there was, right? The reason why we've seen more injuries in the wild card round is because there were 6 games instead of 4. I feel like injuries happen, right? Like, injuries happen in the wild card round too.
Right. And there were a bunch of them in yesterday's game, which I think makes them more noticeable, where Bills are going out. If you stay to the bitter end of the Eagles game, everybody just sort of broke at the end of the game. Slay and Goddard got hurt at the end. So, but I don't know. I don't think I don't have any data.
All right, that does it for today's show. We will be back Thursday morning, 11 a.m., with many more stats and a much more in-depth preview of these 4 divisional round games. So that is Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Make sure you're checking us out. Thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast afterwards. Please listen to that on Thursday, too. I'm Aaron Schatz. He's Mike Tanier. This is the FTN Fantasy Schatz and Tanier NFL podcast, and we will see you on Thursday morning. Peace out.